Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us today as we discuss using innovation to address water security challenges in South Africa. We know that water security is a critical or rather a pressing issue, not only for South Africa, but also globally, as the demand for water continues to rise while water resources become increasingly scarce and vulnerable. Innovation continues to play a critical role in addressing these challenges and finding sustainable solutions. So essentially today we are gathered here to explore the potential of innovative approaches, technologies, and strategies that can help alleviate water scarcity in the country, enhance water management, and to ensure a secure water future for South Africa. Throughout this webinar, we will discuss the various innovative solutions that can be implemented to tackle water security challenges in the country. We are indeed honored to have an esteemed panel of experts who will shed some light on some of the innovative approaches, sharing their insights, their experience, and success stories. And our panel of experts will further discuss how these solutions can be effectively implemented and the challenges that may arise and the potential impacts they may have on water security. We therefore encourage active participation and engagement from all our attendees, as this webinar provides an excellent platform for knowledge sharing, networking, as well as collaboration. Once again, we express our appreciation and gratitude for your presence here this morning, and we hope that today's deliberations will inspire and equip all of us with the knowledge and the tools required to address water security challenges through innovation. Just before we start off, I would like to introduce our moderator for this session, Dr. Michael van der Laan, who is a specialist researcher in the Water Science Division of the Agricultural Research Council. Basically, his research focuses on crop water use and yield, soil organic carbon, non-profit source pollution, climate change, and water resources research and management. He has experience in academia, industry, as well as government, and is currently leading a project to develop a big data platform called the Water Research Observatory that will include the hydrological model for South Africa. He studied at the University of Pretoria, where he is currently appointed as the extraordinary lecturer in the Department of Plant and Soil Sciences. He also serves as the treasurer for the South African National Committee on Irrigation and Drainage, and he is the vice chair of the International Commission on Irrigation and Drainage Working Group Environment. Over to you, Dr. Michael. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Matadlani. So yes, very exciting to be part of this, very important webinar for South Africa, I think, and absolutely star-studded lineup. So I will just begin by introducing our first speaker, Professor Mbaniseni Nepfumbada. He's employed full-time at Rand Water as a program manager in strategic priority projects. I'm just in the interest of time, I'm not going to read the full biography, but I do encourage you to read. He's had a very amazing career. But then I'm just going to hand over straight to Professor Nepfumbada to please begin his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just sharing my screen here. Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this webinar. Probably timely in terms of where we are at within the water sector perspective. My presentation, I've sort of reorganized it a little bit to look at the water security challenges and the role of innovation within the context of the country. And that in itself perhaps will bring in some narrative that looks at what I would call 11,000 meters cruise above sea level, without getting into the details. And I'm hoping that my colleagues will bring in certain elements of what we see as innovation. The presentation, in general terms, I'm looking at the context of water security, innovation, and also looking at how do we approach these problems or the challenges of water security, taking into account the expectations of innovation, and sort of throw in a few questions or some ideas of what are the things that can be looked at, and then we can have discussion on those. This work is based very much on the work that we have done a few years now ago, when we generated a national water security framework through the National Planning Commission work. And I'm showing this so that I can just share that there is certainly this order in some chaos. There's a narrative that comes out, and a methodology of how we got into this becomes very critical. 2 issues or 3 issues that we have looked at then was that we are continuously complaining about issues of poverty, inequality, and ensuring that we reduce the unemployment rate that has gone rampant for a very long time. And what we did was to look at saying, how are we making commitments across the board, obviously through our plans, strategies, institutional settings in respect of mandates, financing aspects or funding aspects of this. And most importantly, maybe even for today's webinar, the sort of the academic, the research environment for which this webinar is quite critical. And we looked at that over time. And to cut a long story short, looking at relationship management, governance strategies, and all of this. And one of the key findings, which is about 3 or 4 years ago, was that we've got about 13 to 15-year implementation in everything that we do at the highest level. Yes, there may be nuggets somewhere in terms of success, but overall, things are very difficult. Now, one of the things that we looked at was the issues that relate to functional issues that are linked to the value chain, water, economy, and jobs, and so on. And also the issues of inequality, poverty eradication, as I've indicated there. If you look at all the commitments that we have through our NDP, you will see that water in and of itself is a nexus. It has a nexus way of looking at this. And I'm questioning there, if you look at SDG 12, which talks to the issue of responsible consumption and production, a lot of work is going into that space, besides the whole issue of saying, how do we ensure that water is clean, people access water, and all of those things. So, and then you look at where we locate innovation within SDG 9. In fact, I just picked up that as I was preparing for this discussion today, we seem to forget that some of these things are interlinked and reflected within the context of whatever development that we are looking at. And without getting into all of those, and I assume that people around the table would know these things in some level of detail. Now, the context of water security that one has been looking at is the aspects of value chains, which suggest or show that it is not a linear supply and demand process. In fact, sometimes we talk about this, and yet when you look at what we are doing, the approach appears to be almost always a linear demand supply plan and all of that. Not much in the issues that relate to water cycle. And there we are now beginning to say, we need to look at issues of ownership, stewardship, ownership means that away from only providing a service or providing something like that, but provide a service with stakeholders rather than for stakeholders. And then we looked at the issue of hydrosocial relations, which talks to the issue of inclusivity. And I'll say a little bit about how does this relate to what we are talking about. Without getting into details, and I think we all know about the issues of access, sustainability, and so on, which is very much embedded in our policies. But what we need to be looking at is, or we have looked at, is this aspect of relational issue of water security, which looks at individuals, household, communities, and how they relate to access the water that they need, which actually allows for the well-being and everything that goes with that. And in that, de-emphasizing the presence or absence of water and accentuate the systems approach. We talk a lot about that, but I'm not sure if we are doing enough to actually make sure that that happens. And I think colleagues can pick that up as they present going forward. And we've got this meaning of innovation itself. I got a bit difficult to say, what are we talking about? But the reality is that we're talking about new inventions and other things related to that. We're looking at products. My assessment is that in terms of some of these issues, for example, the overemphasis on drinking water, for example, or potable water, sometimes leaves one to ask whether we are actually doing the right things. And the questions of the fact that whether we take innovation as a panacea and end up binging on it to some degree, and binging meaning that we spend so much time about it and actually we move away from guaranteed desired results. The context of South Africa, the question we need to ask is that, should innovation, both in terms of process and impact, as well as issues relating to outcome, does it really reduce inequality or poverty and unemployment in some practical and measurable terms? Or is it something that we do it because we are very much keen on it as professionals, scientists, and so on? So the question then the same question can be looked at within the context of water security to say, if integrated water management is a means or a process, then water security should be a goal. And we need to look at innovation within the context of appropriately matching this particular dimension, and which is the reason why we talk about value chains and so on, including the issues of the requirement for the agenda that needs to be transformed. And I have some reference here, which I have thought it would be very useful for today, which is the work that Press wrote 2008 when they were looking at National System of Innovation, which was done by the Human Sciences Research Council. You will see there, if you look at it today, you can ask yourself questions to say, whether are we there? We have actually invested and researched. The presence and or absence of water does not necessarily equate to water security itself. So we need to start looking at these things differently. Now, if you look at the drivers as we have, and this is borrowed from the work done by a colleague, I think he's also a part of University of Pretoria setup where we looked at this, and you look at that in terms of where we are, a lot has been done. But the question is on the impact side, how are we actually impacting within the context of what is expected? The interesting thing there is that the word innovation is not on the diagram. The question is perhaps we need to start looking at these things within the context of issues of knowledge economy and other things that go with that, which we are all familiar with in terms of where we are at. So in water security terms, we suggested that there has to be some principles that are actually important in terms of if we are all to actually move away from dealing with these things from the point of view of, no, the problem is somewhere else. Issues of accountability needs to be clear in terms of what we are supposed to be doing and what interventions are required to actually make a difference. And the most important one there that I've highlighted is the issue of total value chain ownership, which I have mentioned a little bit earlier. We're still battling on that. I think it's a very serious problem to some degree. Everything else we are doing, and I think we fully understand what needs to be done, but we need to start looking at some of those issues in the real term. And that includes researchers, academics, across the board, if you want. What we did there in terms of high-level themes that we looked at is, which we believe at the time, and I think is still very relevant, which needs to look at to say, if you cover this, then you will make an inroad into addressing the challenges of water security. And within the context, for example, if you look at spatial planning and water, which we talk about both politically and geographically in terms of scales, the differentiation in terms of how much water is available in different parts of the supply areas, the use, and so on. And some of which is historical in terms of the planning, or what we have always referred to as apartheid plan, spatial planning, and so on. Narrowing the inequality gap, we report a lot globally, with pride, that we have been doing quite a lot within the water sector space. But still, if we are not retrogressing or regressing, things are not moving in the direction that we require. I will talk a little bit in my concluding remarks on the financial sustainability and infrastructure and finance, because that is probably one key area which probably requires a lot of interventions. The issues of diversifying water sources, there's not much there that one can talk about. Some of us believe that you need to have a way of looking at things such as virtual water, a lot more than what we have, because the rest we are very much familiar, and there's a lot of science that has gone into some of these issues. And one other important one is the ecological infrastructure, which I'll mention a little bit later. I'm not sure in the area of managing water risks and related issues of resilience, response, and water shocks, and so on. If you look at the domain of disaster management, they will show you that a lot of resources go into dealing with the disaster after they have happened, when in actual fact, prevention and actually ensuring that we build up on resilience and so on, it's not really happening as much as we could. I will leave the rest. And the other stuff relate more to perhaps today, even institutionally, if you look at the research, the innovation area, the monitoring, the assessment, and all of that, is actually not happening as much as it should. A lot of us are working on this, but the framing thereof is not allowing us to be achieving what we want to achieve. Sometimes some of us say, we're spending so much time and we are working and we deserve the salaries and the bonuses and everything that we get. But if the difference is not happening, then what? And the last part is actually relating to the state machinery in particular in terms of enabling, given that the water issues are actually embedded in the state system, so to speak, by design. That is the aspect that we all are familiar with. Now, I'm going to use a quick example of what we have picked up on infrastructure and financial flows. You will notice that within the
Professor Mbada?
Yes.
Sorry, it's a moderator. You have 2 minutes left. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah. So if you look at that, you will see that we talk mainly about financial sustainability, not necessarily the flow dynamics that are associated with the biggest part of our business, which is infrastructure and finance, particularly in terms of flow dynamics. That is a very critical part of it, and we're familiar with that. I've used that example to map where we came from and how much impact we have had. So we don't really run short of money. It's probably the things that we need to start looking at to say, how do we begin to make innovation impactful as such, given even the resources that we have? And I'm not sure if we are doing enough on that. In conclusion, or some issues to consider here, is that we do need a combination or combinations of technological, social, institutional, and policy innovations that need to be developed outside the traditional water box or water domain. We need to develop these innovations, different scales that allow us to actually have a lot more impactful result, if I can put it that way. The environment needs to be enabling, accountability and authority, the things that I've mentioned a little bit earlier. Infrastructure is not only about the hard infrastructure that we've spoken about. I think we've been talking about aging infrastructure for quite some time. I recall we've been talking about that, but we need to start looking at different ways of looking at this infrastructure. The other one is very obvious as well in terms of regulatory regime. Funding aspects are very critical. And most importantly, as the last point to make, is that unless we include communities in the best way, from conception to implementation on any value chain that we have, we need to build trust across the value chain, which I think is missing to some degree at this point in time. We are going to flounder, I think. I would thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mbada. I think that was an excellent way to start and a great overview of the complexity and all the moving parts that need to come together before innovation can take place in the water sector. Participants, please remember to post questions in the Q&A box. We have got a nice long session at the end of this webinar to really unpack issues. So please either take note of your questions or post them so long. And I'd like to next introduce Dr. Valerie Naidu from the Water Research Commission. And Dr. Naidu is a water and sanitation research, development, and innovation strategy expert. Thank you, Dr. Naidu. Over to you. Dr. Naidu, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Can you see my screen?
It's still in the PowerPoint edit environment. It's yes, you can just put it in slideshow mode. Great, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so firstly, I want to say thank you for inviting me. I also want to state, just in case I get into trouble with my boss, I'm not the group executive, I'm the executive manager on innovations. Otherwise, I might have a knock on my door to understand why I got promoted all of a sudden. So colleagues, I think Prof gave us a good introduction in terms of, I think, definitions, complexity in the water sector. And I think mine is going to be a little bit more practical at the coalface of actually driving innovation to tackle some of the water security challenges. So let me start with this because I think it sets the scene in terms of what are the drivers that we are using to look at different innovations in the space to deliver water security. I think that urbanization is becoming a major issue, and almost every municipality is affected in unlimited ways in terms of trying to provide water and sanitation services, as the rate of urbanization is occurring in areas that are unplanned, in flood zones, and so the problems just become exacerbated. I think the second thing is we have a traditional way of providing a supply and demand infrastructure, but it's very clear that this is not working for everyone. And I'll speak to that in a little bit more detail as well. But hence, innovation offers us the opportunity of thinking about infrastructure differently from just centralized services. Prof spoke about water scarcity and stress. And yes, there is a deficit. But the point is that we have to look at scarcity and stress at a very local level, rather than looking at just the national numbers, as if we continue to do that, we won't really solve some of the issues on the ground. I think water quality deterioration and health is a major issue, one from the lack of delivering appropriate sanitation services, but also because to some extent enforcement around industrial use, etc., is not as effective as I think we'd all like it to be. And as a result, some of the ecosystems in South Africa are in critical condition. And I think the one that we should all cast a lens on is to look at water security through the lens of climate. South Africa is already a high-risk climate environment. But what we are seeing is that if we don't think a little bit more around the climate, high temperatures, floods, droughts, and all the impacts that that brings on infrastructure access, water quality, etc., we will actually not be able, we will actually be backwards, should I say, in terms of planning for our water security of the future. The other thing I think that's important when we look at this is we must understand that water security or water supply and sanitation delivery is complex, especially for us in a developing country. We spoke about maybe there's not a lack of finance, but where is the finance? How is that finance provided? The lack of economic growth is translated into the lack of cash in the pockets of ordinary citizens. And as a result, one of the key aspects that we're finding is that we're unable to deal with the operations and maintenance cost around water and sanitation services. That gets compounded around the significant social injustice spaces that we find in the country, and of course also our institutions still being strengthened. In the WRC, we have created 3 technical core areas, and in those core areas, we are looking at water availability. So how do you ensure sustainable water availability across all scales and contexts? And then what are the innovations? In this space, we see it's rich in the early warning systems, in new models, in new ways of forecasting, prediction, visualization of data. And how do we bring what I call the built infrastructure, or the gray infrastructure, and then the ecological infrastructure closer, so that we're able to manage water resources more effectively, but then also how do we manage the demand side of the infrastructure more effectively going forward. So here there's tons of innovation. The bigger issue around what I would call the early warning systems is it sitting with the right owners? And do we have the right systems that enable us to use this more effectively? In other words, is the interfaces, the integration between the data and the measurement and the visualization. And then is that information getting to the right people that make decisions in a timeous way? And here we see there's a huge investment required around how we look at big data and the kind of systems that we use going forward. And I think Michael spoke to some extent of the WRC working with the Water Research Observatory as one of the experimental pilots in this space. The second area we're looking at is water use. Of course, as South Africa, we have major water users, agriculture, ourselves as ordinary citizens, and then the industry sector. And so how do we actually bring about innovations that are water and resource efficient, bringing in some of the circular economy concepts? So here we're starting to think about how do you look at things very differently. We typically would say things like, how do you do precision farming with agricultural land? How do you get drought-resistant crops? How do you, use or do agriculture differently? But we're also finding that there are young entrepreneurs that are thinking about agriculture completely different. And here there's a picture of 2 graduates who basically developed a hydroponic planter. And basically, they've said, well, you don't need to have huge sums of land and you don't have to have lots of water. You actually can use hydroponic planter systems and grow lots of crops and sell it to markets in an effective way. So again, you're starting to see here, we're driving not only the change in the way we think about agriculture, but we are using young graduates. They're basically job creators, but they're also thinking about things a little bit different in the way we use water or need water in order to be productive. The third component, obviously, is water quality and health. And in this space, there are many issues around water quality treatment, monitoring, and regulation. We're driving a huge amount of work around the point of use treatment systems. And there's quite a bit of work now with satellite digital systems around looking at water quality surveillance and early warning systems. So here, we don't need to just be sampling and doing chemical sampling all the time. Of course, you have to do it for validation and verification purposes, but you can also start using satellite and start bringing this into different spaces and looking at data a little bit different. It becomes far more impactful. But we can also look at how do you use biodiversity in order to track what are the shifts and changes that are occurring in our river systems, and how would you then collect that data and be able to produce something that is useful to decision makers that can then intervene in a specific way going forward. So in the space of water quality and health, while we're looking at innovations, we're also looking at what are the adaptive strategies that protect the public and the environment going forward. And in this space, there's a lot of stuff also being done where we're looking at the circular economy's future. So how do you use the waste that we are generating, that instead of polluting or just disposing, how do you then convert that into valuable products going forward? We spoke a little bit around water security and innovation, but in many ways, you cannot look at innovation in South Africa without looking at our social justice, at equality, at equity, at the fact that in South Africa, where you live determines what options are available for you for water supply and sanitation. And so the big question we always ask is, can innovation change this reality? And do we have the appropriate innovation systems to contribute to the transformation that's needed? Here you see some photos where basically it's very clear right next to each other. We have suburbs that are using the centralized systems. They're in spaces where there's a lot of convenience in their world. And at the same time, you have communities, basically informal sections of the community where the services are intermittent and not up to scratch from a dignity point of view, from an equity point of view, and from just a convenience in terms of having a better quality of life. So which innovation policy should we apply if we are to make these big societal shifts that improve the lives of people? Because ultimately, water supply for drinking or productive uses or sanitation services is about improving people's lives. So how do we do this? And what we've found in the WRC is that to some extent, while research and development fills the pipeline, it doesn't take you to the final step, which is how do you then transition some of this innovation for real change? So what kind of thinking should you apply? So I think the Department of Science and Innovation has a consortium group that is actually looking at the third frame, which is the transformative change. So how do you take innovation? How do you take research and development? And then how do you envisage this new future? And what approaches do we need? And how can that be different? So you'll see a lot within some of the science spaces now. We're talking about the mission-oriented approach rather than a simple project. We're talking about transformative outcomes approach because we're looking at very tangible shifts on the ground. You hear the new word theory of change coming across even in the DPME at the moment. But to some extent, what we're talking about is really getting back to some of the methodologies that science was already experimenting with, which is design thinking and how you think wrong. How do you create moonshots that entire societal changes can occur while innovation becomes the center of that? So the WRC has created a fourth theme, which is water advisory and support. And yeah, our objectives are, how do you strengthen the capacity building instruments, not just about students and research groups, but can those research groups transition to centers of excellence? Can those chairs become more focused around a societal change? Can you create communities of practice and advisory panels that actually get to the ground and become part of the decision-making framework with public sector officials? How do you create innovation support and demonstration where you create a rich pipeline, but you actually, with intention, actually move innovation into the upper readiness levels that make it easier to be taken up? And then how do you work with this innovation in a multi-year sort of program for that, so that innovation can transfer to the ground, to institutions. Here, we are actually looking at outcomes, and that's because over the years, we've analyzed our portfolio, and we found that just looking at the technology itself doesn't help. You got to look at the whole system, and you got to look at who delivers this innovation. You got to pay more attention to the entrepreneurs and the SMMEs and work and support them as they build their businesses and their ideas towards that marketplace, albeit the public marketplace. And if you're able to do that, you're able to put more climate resilient and adaptation solutions into the water sector. And the key enabler in this is how do you actually strengthen that, whether you call it the triple helix or the quadruple helix of government, industry, academia, and communities working in a much more closer way. Communities not becoming the person right at the end, but actually right at the beginning of the design phase of your innovations, working with public institutions to understand their challenges and how you actually bring this innovation in, not just their challenges in terms of service delivery, but their institutional models, their procurement systems. What are some of these real barriers that is affecting them from taking it forward? So in the WRC, I'm going to just speak about two innovation accelerator programs. One is SASTEP, the South African Sanitation Enterprise Program. And here, basically, we created a very big program around a vision to create a South African sanitation industry that not only creates jobs and contributes to the GDP, but becomes a global leader in the application of alternate sanitation technologies. And that's because we've got almost 35 to 40% of the population dealing with alternate sanitation that is not convenient and does not meet their aspirational needs. So yeah, we're trying to shift to a new gold standard for sanitation through innovation, collaboration, and partnerships. And I think the key thing in this program is we have funds, we have collaboration, there's a longer term funding aspect. We speak around multidisciplinary, not only internally within the WRC, but externally in terms of who supports us, from the engineers to the scientists to the social development specialists. And how do we create these new benchmarks practices as we transition to this new industry? So you're working with an entire system, a system approach to change something, and you're dealing with stakeholders in their space. So you segment them and you segment their needs, and you actually speak to them towards trying to address those needs. The other program is a general water sector technology accelerator, where we work with a range of municipalities dealing with some of their needs and demonstrating in various different provinces the different innovations. And these innovations come from both the universities, but it also comes from outside. It comes from grassroots innovators, it comes from SMMEs, it comes from NGOs, etc. Some examples that we have, for example, on the toilet side, we're looking at water efficiency and resource efficiency. So yeah, we can see that South Africans are also playing in the space of patents, where we're trying to get really low flush toilets. The Aramlu, for example, is now on the market, at Takealot. So it's for affluent populations for now, but with the aim of eventually this also moving into all sort of low income and social housing spaces. The EOS, which is a urine separation program toilet, is separating your urine from your solid human waste. And this actually was a joint program where we were able to get a patent from the EU and SA developed using some of the knowledge that was gained in South Africa from some of the pilots that were done. So as you can see, we're trying to make sure that sanitation, we can still keep the aspiration, maybe some of the conveniences of the flush toilet, but make sure that we use as little water as possible, or use a different displacement technique for sanitation. On the back end of sanitation, we are dealing with non-sewage sanitation, also known as reinvent the toilet. We're trying to align the toilet designs here around a standard so we can have a real quality and performance to the technologies we're putting out. But from a science perspective, we're looking at full recycle. We're looking at low sludge generation, because sludge is a major pollution component in the environment. We're looking at energy and nutrient generation. We're looking at more nature-based solutions for certain environments. And we're definitely looking at lower energy, lower sludge systems as we take this forward. we've segmented here and worked with the Department of Basic Education and rolled out technologies in really difficult environments where sometimes the VIP is not working as well, or the septic tanks is not an option for them. And so they are now starting to look at how to change maybe from just the flush toilet to the VIP and have more options in between for some of the school sanitation systems.
Sorry, Dr. Naidoo, 2 minutes left, please.
Thank you.
Thank
So yeah, it's important to understand that we recognize that there's limited capacity, limited water. There is indignity in some of the solutions. And so there's a need for the program to be designed where municipalities are more they enable the environment, and private sector actually drives some of the solutions. I'm going to pass this one. I think the general stuff that I want to talk to about is the realities people access water from rivers and potable water. So you need to have sometimes solutions to be very simple for communities that protect their health. The reality is there is unreliable supply of water and limited access. So here you can see a lot of innovators coming with storage techniques, with how you move water and store water at household level. And then there is a reality that there are areas where it's very low rainfall, no large water networks. And so you're starting to look at things like sand water extraction and extraction from air for simple potable uses for communities. At the same time, in the space of data, virtual reality, and machine learning, we're starting to see South African be very innovative around non-revenue water, how you measure, how do you change behaviors at household level? How can we use virtual reality in operations and changing practice? How can you use data and machine learning and increase borehole accuracy? One of the big challenges in South Africa around these spaces. So very innovative in the country in terms of some of the innovations that are coming through. Now it's a question, how do we work and try to get them taken up? So my take-home message is simply, innovation is critical to attaining water security, building resilience, and adapting to changes. And some of the lessons that we've learned at the WRC for innovation development and uptake is use the correct innovation policy model, use collaboration and the pooling of funding towards a desired vision, segment your stakeholders in market, you make sure you have appropriate technologies. One size does not fit all. And then the key components of uptake is we do not have good governance across all municipalities. And so you have to work with municipalities in a very different ways and understand their structures and processes for procurement. We need to work with them around enabling their policy and regulations. Solutions that we talk about, we often talk about how do you get cheap solutions to the poor? Actually, that's not the case. You need to understand how to get solutions that have value towards those communities, because sometimes we're in a more reactive mode of continually providing the same solutions of poor quality over and over. And then how do you create demand so that the uptake of these innovations take on? And if the uptake occurs, then manufacturing increases, and then you have a new set of workforce skills, and you're able to create social value, not only from a service point of view, but also from a manufacturing and a job creation point of view. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naidoo, touching on so many important points. I think the questions are coming through thick and fast, so we're going to have a lot to talk about at the end. For me, just again, as with our previous speaker, Prof. Nepfumbada, I think what's coming through is this systems approach. And I think if we can get our minds around that, also the question, how do we do these things? So we all need to, obviously, as being different parts of the system, need to discuss. And thank you so much. Okay, so our next speaker is Dr. Gabriel Lekalakala. He is the head of directorate and specialist scientist at the Climate Change Analysis Unit at the Department of Water and Sanitation. And then straight over to you, Doctor.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. My talk today will focus on water is security and climate security. I thought I should start by showing this diagram of basic indication of what climate change is. I won't go too much into it. So basically, with climate change amplifies our temperatures and it changes our rainfall patterns. And this has impacts on our water resources. South Africa experiences complex weather systems like your frontal rainfall, your tropical cyclone rainfall, and your orographic rainfalls. And when climate change comes on top of this, it further complicates the distribution of our rainfall, the timing, and also it affects the quality of our water. So all of this impacts on how much water, where is it, when are we getting it? The reason why I wanted to make a link between water security and climate security is that in a country like South Africa, which is mainly water limited, water is the medium through which we are gonna experience climate change, and it's the medium through which we'll be able to determine to what extent our efforts towards climate change and mitigation are, and also determine what can be done and where can it be done in responding to climate change. So water essentially will become a limiting factor. Due to climate change, the increased rainfall intensities lead to changes in our river behaviors, leading to our rivers scoring and sedimentation. And this also, as you've seen in the recent floods in KZN, it impacts our water infrastructure. You've seen destruction of water pipes and some of our water holding structures. So climate change poses a significant stress on our water security, and this has a knock-on effect to the various sectors. This brings out the importance of an axis approach that the previous speakers have spoken about to addressing issues of water security. As you're all aware, South Africa is prone to these disasters, and the most prominent ones are your droughts and your floods, and these occur at the same time and requires more complex approaches and more robust policies and frameworks to be in place. And the severity of these are further exacerbated by the poor preparedness levels, our low adaptability and response capability, which also impacts on how fast we recover from such shocks. I thought I should include this slide just to show how climate change impacts our water quality. Changes in temperature would change our water temperature, leading to more microbial activity, meaning more degradation of our water quality. During a drought event, you have more sedimentation, more what I could call muddied water in our dams. So that leads to low water quality. And as I indicated before, floods leads to destruction of our water resources. And also during a flooding event, pollutants and pesticides and other things are transferred into our water systems. The same during a storm event in our cities. So what are we doing as the department? The first part, how we're responding to this is through a policy framework. So our policies are mainstreamed to ensure our current and future water securities. And these policies are aligned with our national development plans, as Professor has spoken about. I won't go into details about them. They're aligned to our sustainable development goals and also aligned to Agenda 23. So the synergization of our policies from local or national to regional to international ensures that the issues of transboundary are taken care of. What do I mean by that? As some of you might know, most of our water that is supplied to Gauteng or Johannesburg comes from Lesotho, and we share our rivers or our basins with our neighboring countries. So to ensure that we're managing our water resources in a synergized manner, we ensure that our policies are synergized with regional and international policies so that we don't end up with maladaptation or risks. Focusing in on our policies or strategies in the department, all these policies are being implemented through what we call the National Water and Sanitation Master Plan. It's a vehicle through which all these policies addressing the complex issues from your water availability, to your water quality, to your water reliability, to affordability, and also take into account the economy and the environment, are filtered through an innovative implementation plan, which is the master plan. Briefly about the master plan, it's a diagnostic tool that analyzes the water and sanitation sector. It consolidates a list of interventions or pathways. It determines pathways to a desired state of our sector. It comprises of a schedule of interventions, actions that should be taken, investments that are required, and enables this to be achieved through an integrated process. What else are we doing to respond to this? We're responding and implementing through innovative interventions. Colleagues have mentioned the Nexus approach in their speeches. And this is critical as it addresses the interconnectedness, the synergies, and also the trade-offs that are there between the water, climate, and the various sectors. So in this diagram, I only have the basic ones, there are more. So when we're doing our planning in the department, from planning to our operations, an integrated approach is used to ensure we have assurance of supply, or we have a secure water. Oh, sorry. So from energy, looking at diversifying renewable energies and energy mixes, from this perspective, we're trying to increase energy availability in the system. From a land or food system is through sustainable land practices and water efficient practices that aim to ensure that the land use and food productivity is at its highest. And from a water perspective, ensuring that the water reserves are enough to buffer us during extreme events. And climate change comes on top of this and amplifies the challenges that we're currently facing. And as you've heard from some of the latest publications from the IPCC, land becomes a mediating factor, acting as both a contributor and a reducer to these impacts. We would like to currently, I'll speak more about it, bring in your desalination plants to provide more water, and also using that linkages between water and energy. In our management, we have to ensure that is done in a sustainable manner. The linkages between water to our various water users, that also needs to be managed in a sustainable manner. And there's a linkage between the energy and land. And in the middle of that, we want to secure our water and ensure a climate resilient development. We've been recently and throughout the department, and as our previous speakers have indicated, in their various institutions, partnerships is key and funding is key. So we've been using a multi-partnership and funding models to implement some of these innovative approaches. One project that I would like to highlight that is new and ongoing is the low carbon climate resilience for water and wastewater sanitation. I'll speak more about it just now. And as most of you might be aware, monitoring is key, and we have developed risk and vulnerability atlas that helps us in managing our water and planning for future water supply systems in our country. And also the Be Resilient project that I want to amplify, it speaks to issues of early warning systems, monitoring. I'll speak more about it after the slide. And the last project that I wanted to share, it's more of a theoretical approach to say, should we not be able to curb or to reach the Paris Agreement of 1.5 degrees, what can we do to create a cooling? So it's a project, it's fairly new, looking at how do we control solar radiation and what are the impacts of that on water and agriculture. Internally in the department, we are developing resilience and adaptation pathways or options for our various water management areas. And this, they'll have spin-offs of mitigation. You will see when I speak about the LCCR project. And currently, these analyses are being done in the Mzimvubu, Tsitsikamma, the Breda, the Berg and Olifants catchment, and the Vaal water management areas. Early warning systems and tools for preparedness and managing our extreme events, it's something that is crucial to us as a department. Hence, we've partnered with UNESCO and other partners, including the WRC, the Weather Service, to develop a system, an early warning system that hopefully will be live in the coming months. And what we'll be doing internally in the department is looking at, for longer term, what can we do, what measures can we put in place for future disasters under climate change. I thought I should give an example from one of our reconciliation strategies. This is from the Eastern Cape. Just to mention that in all our various water management areas, we have technical support groups and strategy steering committees. That's where all the various water users come together, or those who are affected at various levels, they come together and they discuss issues around water supply. And these guides on what appropriate interventions are implemented in those platforms and where those are developed and the monitoring of them. So this diagram just shows some of the long-term measures that are in our strategies to look at a mix of water sources to ensure future supplies. So desalination forms part of that, and looking at exploring groundwater and other sources to ensure that we have sufficient water. Even reuse is part of that. So our low carbon climate resilience project that is being implemented through funding from both the Swiss and GIZ, this will be done at municipal level. Over 20 secondary municipalities were surveyed, and this will be the demo, which is the first phase of the project, will be done in 2 municipalities in South Africa. And there is an opportunity for other municipalities, secondary municipalities, to learn throughout this program. And its objective is to ensure that these municipalities improve their climate resilience, their water service delivery, and including managing their waste water, leading to generation of power. And we're hoping that from this, this can be upscaled and replicated to other secondary municipalities, where we could see low carbon and climate resilience water and wastewater services being improved and reducing the impact specifically on our vulnerable groups. The second project, which is the Be Resilient project, the focus is on using scientific tools.
Excuse me, Dr. Lekala, 2 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. To address issues of disaster and risk. And through this program, we're developing a dashboard to enable early warning throughout the country. And through this program, the citizen science that's being used and the Internet of Things for monitoring our water resources. And there is ongoing training in the various study sites. A few take-home messages. Adaptation to climate change in the water sector is crucial. And it's something that as a department, we are working hard to, from our planning and operations on a daily basis. And the recent extreme events that could be that are associated with climate change calls for accelerated responses and implementation of transformative pathways, as other speakers have indicated. There is a need to ensure harmonization of regional policies so that our development is sustainable to avoid maladaptation and insecurities. We need to build resilient systems and support the transition to water-sensitive cities and investing in ecological infrastructure, as Prof has mentioned. We need to, importantly, when you're talking about water securities, monitoring, maintenance, and management becomes key. And these ambitious actions require joint and harmonized approaches, as I've indicated before. These efforts will lead to resilient infrastructures, response actions that reduce and impact the lives and livelihoods, specifically of our vulnerable community members. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lekala. It's great to see the DWS. This is the angle of everything. I mean, that's the government is where things really happen, and where the power lies to actually make the changes and to introduce the innovation. So thank you for that. And our final speaker for today is Professor Turton. He is sorry, just before I introduce him, thank you for all the questions that are coming through. We've got 381 participants online and 32 questions. Speakers, please feel free to interact with the question in the Q&A box. You can type an answer. We will discuss some of the other questions in the final session. And I think it's just important that this is about water security and using innovation to tackle the problems that we have with water. So please try to focus questions around that. Okay, thanks. Professor Turton, over to you.
Yes, good morning to you and the listeners. It's very good to touch base with some of my former colleagues there, and I recognize many of the names. It's an absolute pleasure to be part of the professional water sector community in South Africa, so I recognize all of you. Right, I don't have too much time. I'm just going to try and add some additional value because a lot has already been said here. So I'm going to start my talk off just by suggesting that we should stop my video. Oh, you want me to stop my video? Okay, great. There we are. Right, so I'm going to start off just by looking at a couple of facts, because I think that's a good, healthy way to start. The first fact is that water is a flux that moves in time and space, but we manage it as a stock. And the difference between a flux and a stock, I think, is key to all of our thinking going forward with innovation. So I would like to just plant the seed very, very firmly as my first opening statement. Water is a flux, but we manage it as a stock. The second thing is that we have no more water today than we had when the dinosaurs roamed free 65 million years ago. This is an important thing because the total volume of water hasn't changed, but the human population has, and the demand for water from humans has grown exponentially. But the total volume of water has not changed because water is a flux moving in time and space. The third thing, and this is I'd like to aim now at the young scientists and the young engineers and the people that are up and coming, the free thinkers, the people that we need to encourage because they are the innovative future of the country. I'd like to say the following as a fact. This is a fact I'm going to share. The way we define a problem determines the solutions that we choose. And we have traditionally defined the problem in South Africa as one of water scarcity. And therefore, the solutions we have traditionally favored are always ones of about centered on storing more water, retaining more water, getting more water. So if water scarcity is your problem, that defines your solutions: build more dams. So I'm going to get to the fourth point now, and this is maybe a contentious point. Dogma is an impediment to innovation. So when you start talking about innovation, the innovator, the truly innovative person, will immediately slam head and shoulder up against this dogmatic wall. No, you can't do this because we've never done it before. So I'd like to say that from my perspective, I've been involved in a lot of companies that develop innovation. I'm a director of a company that develops artificial intelligence, machine learning, highly innovative company, and we are completely opposed to any dogma. We leave dogma at the doorstep. We don't bring it inside the company. So these are the important points of departure that I'd like to share today. So I'd like to suggest that we must encourage our young professionals to dare to be different, to dare to allow ourselves to think differently, and we have to do this. The same old thinking that we have every single day of our lives has brought us to where we are today, and we need to be somewhere else. So we've got to think differently. So I'm going to suggest that South Africa doesn't have a water problem. So this is now completely counterintuitive. I'm going to suggest that we have a water dilemma. And a dilemma and a problem are fundamentally different things. A dilemma is something for which there is no apparent solution and all alternatives are equally unappealing. That's why it's called a dilemma. You refer to sitting on the horns of a dilemma. And I think our role as professionals, and talking specifically to young professionals, the role of the professional is to convert that dilemma, break it down into smaller bite-sized particles, and convert each of those into a problem, because a problem is a good thing. A problem is something that by definition is soluble. So we must encourage problems. We want problems. We want to define the problems adequately. And I would like to suggest that the way we define our problem, certainly in my mind, is that we don't have a water problem. We have a problem of critical thinking. And we have a problem of an abundance of salt, an abundance of pollution. That's our problem, an abundance of salt, not a scarcity of water. So I'm going to use that sort of to take me into the rest of my talk. I had the privilege of participating in National Water Source Strategy #1. It was a very, very innovative moment in South African water history. It was the first time that multidisciplinary scientists were used. Prior to that, no national water source strategy had been formulated, but when such numbers were crunched, they were always done by engineers. And this, for the first time, you now had economists and social scientists and all kinds of different people, ecologists, and it was a completely multidisciplinary team. And I'd like to get back to the fundamental data that National Water Source Strategy #1 gave us, because we've subsequently had #2 and #3, and each of those have really used the same fundamental data that came from Water Source Strategy #1. And I'm going to use that data to define what I think our national dilemma is. So from the National Water Source Strategy #1, we got the number thrown around that we've got 63 billion cubic meters of water. That's the total national water resource, plus minus, I'm going from memory now, plus minus 63, might have been 65, but I think it's 63. And that has subsequently been downgraded over time to around about plus minus 58. And that's been downgraded for various reasons, and one of them being improvement in the mathematical models, and the other thing being climate variability, a change in the resource base. So basically, we can take with sort of a reasonable accuracy as a point of departure that 58 is plus minus what we have. That's the total volume of all the water in all the rivers. That defines our future in the country. That defines our developmental trajectory. And we know from National Water Resource Strategy number 1 that we had captured plus minus 62 to 63%, maybe 66 as much as that. Let's call it 2/3 of the total volume of water in all our rivers we had captured in dams. And we know from international literature that once you start crossing that threshold, you start running into all sorts of ecological limitations. So we don't really have too much space for too many more dams in South Africa. And so I would suggest that the dam building era is over, and those people that are thinking about building a career in dams are probably going to have a limited career. But the other thing that was developed during National Water Resource Strategy number 1 with great clarity was another number, and that's the number 38 billion cubic meters. That's a total volume of all the water in all of our dams. That's our total national strategic storage capacity. And assuming that is 100% full, I was at the CSR, I was a fellow at the senior CSR for a couple of years after that National Water Resource Strategy was developed. And we started working in great depth on this particular number, and we started doing forward projections. And we determined that by about 2030 plus minus, right about then, we're going to need about 63 billion cubic meters of water assuming we're going to create full employment and a thriving economy with economic growth. We were pro economic growth, so we went into the stagnant economic thinking. So we did all the best number crunching we could, and we came to the number of 63. So 63 is what we need, and 58 is what we have, assuming we suck every river dry and leave nothing but mud and dead fish behind, which is not in our interest. So 63 is what we really need. That's the number that we've got to look at. And 38 is what we have available in all of our dams. And that therefore starts bringing into focus a very, very clear problem. And that problem is, how do we make 38 equals 63? Well, quite simple. You multiply it by 1.5, 1.6, and you get 63. So there's a shortfall there between 63 and 38 of 25 billion cubic meters, plus minus 25 billion cubic meters. That is going to be our national shortfall. That's our strategic limitation on economic growth and development. And I fully acknowledge the earlier speakers that gave very deep insight into the need to create jobs and inclusive economy and tackle all of the evils of the past. We need to do that without any question of doubt. So our challenge, I would say, is quite simple. Our challenge is to firstly think of water as a flux, not as a stock. If it's a flux, then the fact that we are water constrained is a good news story, because it now talks about the need to innovate and develop a nation of innovators. Because what we have to do, we have to suddenly create 25 billion cubic meters per annum of new water. 25 BCM, that's what we need. That's the size of the market for new water. So if you want to think in commercial terms about attracting capital into the water sector, then that's the size of the market. 25 billion cubic meters, that's a big amount. It's 2/3 of the volume of all of our dams. In other words, we have to create, as young professionals, we have to create in the next decade or so, we've got to invent a way of mobilizing 2/3 of the total volume of all the water in all of our dams for a noble cause: economic development, wealth creation, wealth redistribution, all of those good noble thoughts. So that's a very clearly defined problem. How do we mobilize 25 billion cubic meters of what I would call new water? And if anyone knows anything about me, you'll know that I'm very, very bullish on seawater desalination. I personally am of the opinion after the National Water Resource Strategy number 1, which clearly indicated that all of your coastal cities, from Richards Bay in the north all the way down to Cape Town in the south, every single city along the coast is fundamentally water constrained, fundamentally. And I live in KZN, so I know exactly what's happening in eThekwini. I've recently participated in a national roadshow We are engaged with 5,000 high net worth clients for one of the major banks in South Africa. And they were all looking at, these are all entrepreneurs, business owners, etc., and they all talking about their water and energy constraints and how the banks can assist them in overcoming the water and engineering challenges. So I've got a very, very deep insight into what's happening across the entire country after this roadshow. And I can tell you that every single major city along the coast is fundamentally economically constrained right now because of water. But they are all on the ocean. They've got a vast and almost unlimited supply of water, but it's got too much salt in it. So I'm very bullish on desalination, but not small Mickey Mouse desalination, 2 megaliters a day, 5 megaliters a day package plant like we've been fiddling with. I'm opposed to that. I'm very, very strongly in favor of big utility scale desalination, sort of 250 megaliter a day plants in bigger, 500 meg plant, big stuff. So let's just quickly start looking at this desalination thing and start drilling down to the numbers. I know there's a dogmatic a knee-jerk reaction with some people that are opposed to desalination for whatever reason, and I know that some people are going to push back now, and that's fine. I've got no problem with that. I let facts speak to them, to my defense. And so the facts are as follows. The current global benchmark cost for desalination is about 35 US cents per kiloliter. In current today South African exchange rate terms, that's R6.50 a kiloliter. That's the bulk cost. Okay, now let's compare that. Let's just compare that to some other realities. The Umgeni Water Board right now, their bulk tariff is R8.37. R8.37. That's not very far from the R6.50 per kiloliter, which is the global benchmark. But then let's just drill into the global benchmarks now, and let's just see how they've changed over time. So the current global benchmark is 35 US cents per kiloliter. In 2017, that was 50 US cents per kiloliter. That's R9.28 in today's terms. And in 2012, it was 65 cents per kiloliter, which is 12 Rand in today's terms. So you can see clearly from 2012, it's gone down from 65 cents to 50, now down to 35. And I'm working in the Middle East at the moment, and the Middle Easterners have got a very different view of this whole thing compared to us, and it's very, very refreshing. And the Saudis are driving this cost down. They want to see 25 US cents per kiloliter. That's way, way below the cost of that for us to produce any potable water from any river, given the fact that our rivers are increasingly polluted, increasingly scarce, and increasingly overloaded. So I see personally a future for innovation. In fact, I cannot see how we can even think of economic growth and development seriously in South Africa at macroeconomic scale, unless we start looking at large scale desalination plants. And I'm trying to mention something, 2 areas of innovation that I think we must be very proud of. In fact, 3 areas of innovation that we must be very proud of in South Africa. I try to put it on the agenda here today. So the first area of innovation has to be in the 1960s, 1970s, when Namibia, then known as Southwest Africa, was under the administration of South Africa. And the city of Windhoek had serious water problems. And the CSIR developed the world's first direct potable water reuse from waste in the city of Windhoek. That is South African technology, taking water from sewage directly at source and providing potable water. It's a world first. And there's no strange people in Windhoek today. It's a thriving city. There's no long-term health impacts that we know of, etc. It's been a very successful technology, a South African technology. So we must embrace that technology. The second thing that I'd like to say about South African technology that we must be very, very proud of was when Professor Kader Asmal was Minister of Water Affairs in the early transition to democracy in that era. He led a very, very high level of innovation where the Durban South wastewater treatment works near Manzimtoti was upgraded. And instead of discharging that waste water out to the sea, an agreement was reached with Sapref Oil Refinery and with Sappi Mondi, the paper mill. Both of them are close by. And the deal was that they would take the treated effluent off as industrial process water. So today, most of the photocopy paper you use, in fact, if you've got photocopy paper in your hand right now or in your office right now, that's all been produced with recycled wastewater from the Manzimtoti South, Durban South Wastewater Treatment Works. Extremely successful project, extremely successful. I was present the day that Ronnie Cashels, who became the Minister of Water Affairs, when he commissioned that plant, and in a public statement, he actually took a glass of that water, that industrial process water, and drank it in front of the media. So we must be extremely proud of that thing. But the third thing that we must be extremely proud of from a South African perspective, from a technology and innovation perspective, is another thing that's been happening in eThekwini that most people might not be aware of. And that is that your long-term cost of desalination, the big cost of desalination, your OPEX cost, is to do with the level of salinity in the water, your osmotic pressure. So if you can reduce your osmotic pressure, then you fundamentally alter the economic model for seawater desalination over a 35-year life of infrastructure, which has got a major impact on the cost. And this there's been a project that's been done. I'll wrap up now. There's been a project that's been run. There's been a project that's been run now in Durban for a period of time, and that has proven to basically take your wastewater from sewage works and then put it into the seawater to reduce osmotic pressure, which has fundamentally changed the economics. So these are all innovations that have happened. I'm just going to close it with one more statement now. When you talk about desalination, one of the big things is brine, and the global standard is that you can you probably recover about 60% of the water. 1/3 of the water will become brine. And once again, innovation in South Africa, University of Cape Town, funded by the Water Research Commission, has developed a eutectic freeze crystallization technology that's been applied very successfully at the water recovery plant at Imadasheni, and that is at the Tweefontein wastewater treatment works, and that is pushing 90% water recovery. The goal is 98% water recovery. Absolute world-class technology. South Africa's done it. So just in closing, I'd just like to suggest that it's not a doom and gloom scenario at all. In fact, we've got a very prosperous future ahead of us if we embrace technology. There's an abundance of capital. There's an abundance of willingness to invest into the space. There's an abundance of technologies. All we need to do is start actually creating these bankable projects. And I'm fully convinced that South Africa is going to have a prosperous future. I thank you very much for indulging me.
Thank you so much, Professor Turton. Always so interesting to listen to you and your ideas and new things that are new technologies that could potentially make a big difference for us. So now we've reached the question and answer session. There really are a lot of questions. So we're sitting with 373 participants, which I think is very impressive. It just goes to show how important this work is, and perhaps we need a 3-day conference because there's a lot to cover. So I won't get to all the questions, but I'll try do my best, especially focusing on innovation. I'd like to start with a set of questions which all talk around the same thing. I think it's Dr. Naidoo that might be in the best position to answer this, but Professor Turton, with your experience, and Professor Nepfumbada, same with you. So Sibusiso Dlamini says, please also involve basic education on innovative ideas. Pupils are amazing when it comes to innovation and creative thinking, which can be populated to research and implementation. Also, is there funding available to support innovations for emerging businesses, especially in rural areas? And then from an anonymous attendee, I would like to get involved in the alternate sanitation. How would one get involved? And then finally, Dr. Naidoo touched on graduates coming up with new ideas to improve water security by developing sustainable agricultural practices. My question is, are there programs in place that support graduates and give them the space to come up with projects? So I think all these questions deal with one main issue where they're asking if I've got an idea, I want to start a business, or I want to develop a technology, or I want to help implement something. Is there funding? Is there support available? Speakers, can you please put on your cameras, and then Dr. Naidu, if you don't mind starting, and if any of the other speakers would like to comment, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think, Michael, this year we've changed the funding approach of the Water Research Commission. So we're actually in a space where we've just finished a whole lot of stakeholder engagements. And the idea is we're calling for concept notes. And what we found is that maybe our system became a little bit stale. So we're getting the same ideas over and over. But we also started to realize that, especially when it comes to innovation, it does not sit in the ambit of purely academics. So yes, you can talk about these complex chemical processes, the decel, the new membranes, etc. Okay, fine. I mean, those require deep set of expertise. But sometimes where you're building resilience in rural areas or communities or amongst youth, or trying to bring change in behaviors, etc., new agricultural practices, we find that actually some of the grassroots innovators, the township innovators, the youth that are coming through are thinking about things maybe just a little bit differently. And they're integrating the digital spaces with the innovation spaces. And so there's some really nice creativity in those spaces. So the way we've looked at it is, initially we used to have these walk-ins to increase the inclusivity. That's how those two graduates sort of came through. Because typically, if they had submitted to us through a proposal, we probably would have rejected them, because we would have said, oh, you don't meet some of these criteria. But by simply opening up the space to listen to people, as opposed to have a written sort of approach to things, we were able to increase the inclusivity of some of the ideas that were coming through. So I think it's about also, you need to be innovative in your own institutions and spaces to say that the old ways aren't necessarily the best ways. How do you increase opportunities for graduates, for youth, for people that are thinking about things differently? And by the way, if innovation is coming from the problem, what better than the people that are actually in the middle of the problem to solve it? So, yeah.
Right, thank you very much for that. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think I tried to answer one of the questions in the question list there, particularly in relation to resources or financing of innovation. I think that there's quite a challenge within the institutional setting that allows the financial flows to the direction that we've been talking about. If you look at the amount of resources that end up in servicing the institutions and the administration thereof, it's quite a lot. So that's why even the suggestion of ring-fencing some of these things becomes very critical. My belief is that, and I agree with those people that suggest that we don't really have a money problem as such. That's why some of us are saying we need to move into financial flows and things like that. I've checked one organization, for example, in the water sector space, whose annual budget is equivalent to 1% of a single project on the infrastructure, which to me, we need to start looking at these things to say, are the resources flowing to the right spaces? And I'm specifically referring to the question on innovations within a community setup and all of that. There's quite a lot that can be said, and I think I can leave it at that. But it's very critical that we look at how much funding is getting lost within the context of the institutions. I'm not going to get into other details. Thanks.
Yes, thanks very much for that important point. Professor Turton, would you like to weigh in? Otherwise, I can move on to the next question.
Yes, I can just mention that funding is a big issue, and of course we have to get into the heart of the entrepreneur now. So I work mostly in the private sector. I don't work with any state money at all, and I can tell you the private sector is awash with capital that's willing to go into innovation. The question is, how do you access that? And for example, I've developed a patented technology myself. It cost me my own money. I put my own money into it. I didn't reach out to anyone else, because the instant you go to a research institution, something like that, the issue of IP becomes a challenge. So a true, I think well, I don't want to say a true innovator, but I'll say one type of innovator is the independent innovator that will get independent capital, and of course that will eventually become a sort of a private enterprise type of thing. And that's what the private sector thrives on. The private sector is very good at solving problems like that. And I always look at this issue in terms of a model that I call the 1, 2, 3 model. And the 1, 2, 3 model, I'll just quickly share it to you. So it's just a very brief model. Number one is come up with a really good idea, really very good idea. A cell phone's a good idea. A wheel is a good idea. Some really good ideas. Okay. The second thing is populate that good idea with enthusiastic and competent people. Number 3, money always flows to good ideas sold by enthusiastic and competent people. Most people, I find, look for number 3. They look for the money before they've got the number 1 and the number 2. First, get the good idea. Don't worry about the money. First, get the good idea, and then really work that good idea, and ultimately capital will come to that. And once that idea is identified as being good, there will be a huge amount of capital. And I mean, the sums of money that are potentially available are vast. I mentioned I'm working in the Middle East right now, and we're busy setting up an exchange there, kind of like a stock exchange, if you like, for carbon and water trading. But alongside that, we're setting up an innovation hub. And the whole idea there is that young innovators are going to be exposed at very early stage to angel investors and to venture capital investors right up front, right in the beginning. That's what the intention is. We're still in the conceptual phase at the moment. But that's the idea there, that we can bring capital together with young innovation early on, and align it in this case with Middle Eastern government interests. So that's kind of where my professional life is going at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks. Sounds very encouraging. I would like to also just build on the point Dr. Nefumbada made with a question to Dr. Lekalakala. It's from an anonymous attendee. Development in green technologies comes at a cost which cannot be justified financially, but provides more long-term sustainability benefits. Can legislation be speeded up to drive innovative green tech to protect our environment?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Recently we've been doing a consultative process of our National Water Resource Strategy, and that is covered within that strategy, and that will be filtered through our master plan. So that is in the pipeline. Our strategies and policies and plans are continuously being updated, as you might be aware, and these are updated as we have new technology coming up, new knowledge coming up. So yes, we're actually finalizing the strategy, and there is a copy of it. I think it's online. If you're struggling to get it, you can email Matshidiso or the team. We'll get you a draft copy. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Then there's another question that was for Dr. Naidoo. What do you think of technocratic approaches such as irrigation schemes instead of farmer-led approaches? So I think it's again this being driven from the person experiencing the problem, as opposed to someone sitting in an office somewhere trying to figure out how to spend money. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'm not an agricultural person, so I'm not going to speak from that perspective. I'm speaking more from the principle. I think what we've found when it comes to innovation, the bottom up is really the key, but the stakeholders that control the power, the governance, the policy, maybe some of the funding as well, is also critical as part of that mix. So my feeling is that irrigation schemes are useful for certain aspects, but I also think they're what we call old-fashioned schemes, of where we actually were far more wasteful around the way we use water and the way we direct water. And so there's probably a need to rethink conceptualization of farmer-led initiatives with some of the more larger scheme-led initiatives, and how to modernize that both from not only the large farmers, but also the small and emerging farmers' point of view. Because I think the issue of water allocations and fairness around that space also needs to be brought in as part of that mix when we're thinking about how to do things differently, I think, for agriculture in South Africa.
Okay, great, thank you.
Hey,
So-
comment on that quickly, Michael.
Absolutely, please go ahead.
My previous life of being in agriculture will probably come in a little bit. There's something that needs to be looked at in this context, because it appears to me that the technologies and the research and the innovations tend to be focusing on the large scale and commercial and all of that. And the rest of the sectors, particularly small scale enterprises and farming communities and so on, there's not much in terms of the actual research on the ground, that allows them to benefit in much the same way as the commercial agriculture actually benefits. One of the problems is the fact that everything goes commercial and big stuff, and the rest just receive. I think you probably would have an understanding on that, because we need to start looking at small scale, decentralized to some degree activities that allow, because they can also be commercial, they can be industrial, they can be, So I think that is probably something that needs to be looked at.
Okay, thank you very much. And then there's a couple of questions around the topic of skills. So I think we have a lot of young, enthusiastic people who just want to get out there and make things happen, and that entrepreneur spirit. But then there's also people deciding what they want to study and what they want to specialize in, what kind of career. Any panel members, you're most welcome. But do we have enough skills coming through the pipeline for the water sector? Do you have any advice to young people thinking about getting into the innovative water space? And yes, speakers, please just put your cameras on when you are talking. Thanks.
And I'll put my hand up for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think based on my experience, I think South Africans are highly innovative, absolutely highly innovative. And in fact, the young South Africans are particularly gifted in my view. And I've got a theory about why that is. I think it's because they've simply lived an entire life of uncertainty and change. They are very, very, they're not tethered to any old dogmatic view of the world. So I have found some extremely competitive, when I say competitive, people that can compete with the very best that are available in any other part of the world. So we must stop looking elsewhere for inspiration. We've got that inspiration in South Africa, and we must just start having confidence in that fact. And of course, our private sector is a bit constrained at the moment, but the private sector is also a highly innovative space, and innovation will go ultimately where it is welcomed. So it's a question of regulation. How and where can that be regulated to make it feel welcome, to make it feel like it can become a contributing part of the future. But I'd just like to close by saying I'm extremely excited about our young people. They are very much our future, and they are highly, highly competent.
I agree 100%. Any others of the speakers like to comment?
Yeah, I think from the Water Research Commission, obviously we pay attention to the graduates, the honors, the masters, the PhDs, and I think you need to build that, and we will continue to pay attention to that. We're working with, for example, the CETAs, etc., to try and build more opportunities in that space. However, I do think that we are continuing to encourage people to be entrepreneurs, to move from being graduate to being a job creator, so to speak. And they are innovative. So the question is not only, I think, the money that is there or the degrees or the disciplines, it's also the system. Is the system enabling? Is the system open to new ideas? And by that, I mean the public sector, the private sector spaces. And I think those collaboration spaces between industry, private sector, the investors and these students, by the way, who are much more attracted to some of these green industry spaces. But these green industry spaces are new spaces, even for municipalities. There are grants that drive green industry, for example, but they don't always choose the green tech. So the innovative sort of green tech is normally very much fails at the prototype stage. And so how do we build? How do we encourage? How do we, should I say, create a risk appetite for these, for spaces to be created, for this tech to be developed further, to be used and de-risked? And I think, yeah, it's not just about research institutions. It's about all the entities that are looking for these solutions also opening up spaces. We use the term test beds, and it's not just test beds for a technology, but sometimes technology comes with a very innovative service model. So how we open to testing the service model with these young graduates, by the way, who think very differently and can completely open up the market and create new opportunities there. And so I think we must work on both. One, providing the opportunity, but also creating the system that they're able to flourish in.
Great, thank you.
Can I add?
Please.
Yeah, we are seeing more and more young people coming into the sector at university level. I've had the pleasure of being an external examiner and a supervisor to some of the undergraduates and postgraduates throughout our universities. And recently, I was attending a prize giving at the Stockholm Water Week. And there are a lot of young people at primary school, high school level, coming up with innovations to solve our water issues across the globe. I believe we're going towards the right direction, but more funding is required, and more of these young people to come up with these innovative solutions, and also to replace us in future. Yeah. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Michael, just one quick one, which perhaps is directed at a professional body.
Sorry, Prof, would you mind putting your camera on?
Okay.
Thank you.
Just one quick one relating to perhaps a professional body such as this body that organized this webinar. I think the space, because often we tend to go to higher end issues of get the degree, get the PhD, and everything that goes with it. And I think there's a lot of work that has been actually been researched and written. I think some of the work is coming through Human Sciences Research Council and so on, where our system is not necessarily opening up for the young people. Perhaps a body such, a professional body such as this needs to start doing what one can say, upping the ante. Because, you know, discussing is very easy. Generally, and I think Prof. Chuten has raised that, very often is almost the same groups of people that actually get around the table to speak the same things. We need to start opening up so that the systems are open up to everyone, young and old, by the way. Thanks.
Thanks. Also a great comment. I think it is exciting that the WRC, it's not business as usual anymore, and are sort of putting these platforms together that can help young entrepreneurs and upcoming scientists and engineers, and just to really feel confident and positive about the water sector. It's many challenges, but personally, I find it a very interesting space to work in. Again, I'm just going to ask one question that any of the speakers are welcome to comment. It's come through, and it's about groundwater. So we know that South Africa is a very scarce, water scarce region. I think 43% of the rainfall falls on 14% of the area. But groundwater, is it a major untapped resource in South Africa? Perhaps you can comment on solar-powered pumps, and just on where you think exciting things might happen with groundwater in South Africa.
If none of the speakers are brave enough, I will be stupid enough to take that question.
Thanks.
Okay, I see. I have no fear. Groundwater, I think, is a very important resource, but we need to understand that it's a very complex resource as well, and I call it a Cinderella resource. And the reason is simple. Wherever you find groundwater, you're going to have a lot of infrastructure needed to get lots and lots, hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of boreholes into a well field to deliver the kind of volume that you need. Every pump needs a cable. We know what happens to cables in South Africa. It's not a happy relationship with cables and South Africans. So the infrastructure required to link up many, many boreholes into a well field, into a production well field is quite challenging. So I personally am not that excited about boreholes. Where I am very excited about groundwater, and I think the future of groundwater is going to be about groundwater recharge, aquifer storage and recovery, because one of the earlier speakers spoke about the climate change reality. The real climate change reality, I just want to quickly give you a little throwaway fact now. Of 100 units of rain that fall out of the sky in South Africa, only 8.5 units become water in a river or dam. The rest is lost to evaporation. That is remarkable. And if you look at the Orange River and the Fish River, it's less than that. It's about 3 units that become water in a dam or river. So 97 units are lost. That's a major, major thing. And under climate change, with a warmer climate, that's going to become worse. So in other words, the future, from an innovation perspective, it's not just about building new dams. It's about finding better ways to store large quantities of bulk water. I think probably one of those ways is groundwater recharge. There's a lot of this happening internationally. I regularly go to see a plant called the Beanie Up Wastewater Treatment Works water recovery plant in Perth. They recover 120 megalitres a day from sewage. 120 megalitres per day recovered from sewage water and banked in the Leederville aquifer. So that's a world-class project. I've been watching it with great interest for now since its inception. I'll go there regularly. I'll be there next month again, in fact. So I regularly go there. Thank you.
Michael?
Yes, please.
Yeah, look, I was hoping that Dr. Lekala will say something about the policy domain in terms of groundwater, but then maybe one can comment. The one thing is that I don't think in the groundwater is lack of what needs to be done. Perhaps we do need to look at the modalities such as, for example, groundwater tends to be a localized resource. So the distance between the source and the utilization is much shorter. So obviously your innovations and whatever else that you do would be different. And in the past, we tried this. I remember building towards the current strategies of the department. We even had a NORAD-funded project that was across the country, where we were looking at different ways of providing water resources. And a lot of us believe that as a local resource, that's where you can begin to address local water challenges. And if you do that, then, and obviously there's also the issues of operations in terms of how do you ensure that you do not over-abstract, such as some of the problems we picked up in the Northwest and all of that, where for some time, over-abstraction becomes an issue. The second point is that I don't think we need to look at groundwater in isolation. The last I checked, I think there's a very large percentage of small towns in the country that actually are supplied through groundwater in one way or the other. And perhaps we need to start looking at, again, from the presentation I made earlier, it needs to be looked at within a systems approach so that we can bring the policy of conjunctive use, the policy of local water management, multiple user sectors and all of that into play. I think a lot can be done or can be achieved. Thanks.
Right, thank you. And then Valerie, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think, Michael, firstly, in terms of aquifer recharge, it's already being practiced. I mean, in the Cape, we've had 50 years of banking water. So there's huge experience. It's just that the way our rock formations are, you can't actually bank water everywhere across the country. So you pick and choose based on where you're getting the best efficiencies for that type of space. I think the other thing maybe which we haven't explored, except from a conceptual point of view, is looking at water sensitive design, where you actually do engineered systems underground and start to store water in those sorts of spaces. Very much like how we used to create these large canals back in the day. And the canals used to be almost a multifunctional infrastructure between recreational and the movement or alleviation of water flows within cities and around cities. I think when we talk about groundwater, we don't just talk about groundwater in South Africa, we're talking about the water mix. So how do you manage different forms of water, alternate sources of water, in a way that gives you your assurance and reliability? So what we are moving to is more complexity. And so I think in South Africa, in order to build more water security in terms of reliability, access, and assurances of supply, we need to actually play around with all of the different sources of water in a local context, rather than just simply thinking about large dams and large pipelines and moving water, into those spaces. So I think if you look at Europe, for example, what they do really well is what I call local services. From a sanitation system to a water system, they're very local, and they do their operations and maintenance, and they have local supply chains, and they're able to run it in that sort of way as well. Not everything is big and bold and being pumped through kilometers of pipes and pumps. And I think that's the way we should be thinking about groundwater. It's not just surface water or groundwater. It's a mix. It's water reclamation, it's reuse, it's desalination, and it's a variety of other alternate sources that supply a local region that allows them to bring some sort of security around their productive and consumptive uses.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so systems thinking, but site specificity also comes into it, local use. Also to the whole panel, there's been some questions about monitoring. So there's exciting things, new technology, obviously all these satellite products. There's these little cheap computers like Raspberry Pis now that you can develop all applications for. In our South African context, what is the most important thing to measure, to better manage our water, that we need innovation to measure it in a cheaper way or a more consistent, continuous way?
I think
Perhaps.
let me take a stab at the way we're looking at evaluation, but also from a compliance point of view or regulations point of view as well. So it's very clear that, I mean, we're shifting from just chemical sampling, monitoring and evaluation, to sort of the more modernized digital ways of doing it using big data systems. So this is where the satellite systems, radar systems, different ways of using data and allowing data to be used smartly, both for decision making, but also for basically visualization. But we're also starting to see more and more, because we're using largely similar packs of data, right? The people, at least stakeholders coming in and trying to share data, especially in the public space at the moment. I think it's becoming more clearer that just going it alone is not enough. And I think you can speak to that as well, Michael, from the WRO perspective, that there is a need, there's a lot of data and we're all paying for it, but how do we basically pay for it together in a pooled kind of way that then gives benefits for various different entities that may be using different models with that data to give them different outputs. And I think that's where, again, we're talking about a system, now we're talking about a data management system, a pool data management system in South Africa. And from that, you can get a variety of different monitoring and evaluation tools, apps, devices that actually can lead to benefits for the sector. But again, I think we're still at that early stages of how do you manage data, and then how do you integrate the systems? What sort of large systems do we require that actually manages this data on our behalf, and then we're able to create intelligence from it?
Right, thank you. And just the right amount of information to make a decision. I see a hand up, Prof. Provider.
Yeah, I think the one gap that we will be missing in terms of the issues of monitoring will be a couple maybe, but one, the gap is the jurisdictional structuring of monitoring itself is very fixed to some degree. So when we talk about monitoring and information, we need to be very clear in terms of what are we referring to within the context of how we have structured our systems. And that's probably another discussion for another day. And that I can challenge SACNESP to at least maybe try to pick up on that so that we can also do an integrated view. Secondly, the resourcing that is expected for that is also largely provided, actually quite a lot of it is provided through the fiscus. People are not necessarily aware of it. It's embedded into different institutions, some of whom are trying to repeat things that are funded already through the fiscus, which are supposed to be funded in other ways. The private sector comes in and they've got difficulty. How do they enter into this value chain if the planned and structured systems are not actually doing what they're expected to do? I think my recommendation for this one would be perhaps we need to have another discussion, because the value of information, knowledge, and all of those things, and perhaps maybe to some degree innovation, is not in the physical rands and sense. It's in ensuring that the flows of this data and information access and all of that happens. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. So we're coming to the end of the webinar. I'd like to finish off by each of the speakers in the order that you spoke. If you had to quit your job and become an entrepreneur tomorrow and were given 10 million rand, what idea would you go for? So we've only got about 30 seconds each, and then if you have any closing remarks. Thank you.
Does it mean I'm supposed to start? I'm not sure if I want to share on this platform what I would do with 10 million rand. But if I were to bring in the closing remark, and I think my last comment is leading to that in terms of my understanding or my view that innovation, knowledge economy-based activities and all of that, the value is not in the physicality of the rands and cents, but in how we deploy and operate. The second issue is that we have got too many institutions literally doing the same things. And I think we need to start looking at that from the point of view of economies of scale and other things that are related to what we have created. We've got policies, they are fine to some degree, maybe to a large degree. Let's try to implement those. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you.
So I think, firstly, we have a system, we've created a national system of innovation, but it's largely fragmented. And so you need, institutions are great at playing at a development role. But I think once you start moving into the market space, where you need to interact a little bit more, I think, with the private sector, the investor space, and actually create value through that. I think there's almost a one-stop shop that goes beyond just structuring projects, etc., but really working with innovators so that they understand how to create their value proposition and their business models that they're able to then sort of take forward. So like I said, lots of great ideas, but sometimes that little experience of understanding the system itself is where they fall short. And I think this is where persistence and maybe a little bit of know-how will actually lead them in the right direction. So I still think there's some spaces for, like we see overseas, where there's a lot of what we call the tech developer type companies coming in and supporting as the technologies are developed and taken into the marketplace. There's still, I think there's still roles for that to be played, including NGOs, by the way. playing those roles with grassroots innovators, etc. There's those enablers, I think, that will create great value, almost the bridge that fits in.
Thank you. Gabriel, any closing remarks?
What comes to mind is I would invest in wastewater, because I mean we're currently seeing globally. I don't want to mention where there've been tensions around water, and water is becoming like oil and gold. So investing in wastewater, that would be what I would do. My closing remark would be to encourage more collaboration in solving these complex issues that threaten or curb our water security, and the bringing in of ideas, as Dr. Naidoo has indicated, together, and also bringing in the money from private sector, because we shouldn't think government is the only one that has the money. And through the projects that we ran, we've seen the impact and importance of collaboration in fast-tracking implementation, and that is key. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Am I up to bat?
Yes.
Okay, I'm in fact currently involved in a project, so this I'll put my money where my mouth is, and that is the quantification of benefits arising from water credits that can be fungible assets. In other words, an asset that can be traded on an international market, international stock exchange. This is a very exciting way of looking at ecosystem goods and services, because it's a way of actually converting it into literal cash flows that can benefit local communities. So it's a very complex field, but it's a field I think that's emerging, and I think it very much resonates with the younger generation today of people that like developing apps and and all that kind of stuff, algorithms and what have you. But this is very much a thing of the future. Just imagine if someone can start trading, for example, the benefits of leaving a wetland intact or improving a wetland, and actually converting that into a revenue stream for a local community. I think that's a great benefit, and actually putting that into the market where it can be traded in a way that can be audited and assessed, etc. So that I think is something that's interesting. Thank you.
Thanks. Very interesting. Okay. Thank you very much to the speakers. To the participants also, thank you very much. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all the questions, but I think for me it's clear that we do need SACNASP and or DSI organizing a bit of a conference, perhaps even a exhibition where people can come and demonstrate their new ideas and technology. And with that, thanks. I hand over back to Dr. Matabane. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And just briefly, on behalf of SACNASP, we would like to express our sincere gratitude to all our learned speakers this morning, and to you, Michael, for moderating this session for us. And most importantly, to all our attendees for your invaluable insights as well as active participation. The deliberations today have shed light on the tremendous potential of innovation in addressing the challenges that we spoke about. We have explored a range of innovative solutions that have the power to transform the way we manage and utilize water resources, ensuring a sustainable and secure water future in South Africa. And we must also acknowledge that implementing such innovative solutions or approaches comes with its own challenges. We spoke about funding and implementation of policy frameworks. It is evident that we should be working together across sectors, across disciplines, to overcome some of these challenges and drive the adoption of innovative solutions. And we saw from all the presentations that collaboration is key, collaboration between academia, government, the private sector, research institutions, and the communities. It's crucial in implementing and scaling up some of these innovations. So we need to foster a culture of partnerships where we can share knowledge and resources and create an enabling environment that encourages innovation and supports the implementation thereof. And it was very encouraging to hear the speakers about nurturing our young scientists and innovators or promoting entrepreneurship. This was actually one of the recommendations from a report that we published on the pathways into the labor market. So it's very encouraging and exciting. And in closing, we just want to thank everyone for your participation, and we look forward to our continued efforts in leveraging innovation for water security in our country. Stay safe and have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.